Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on Inside the Engine Room, Overcoming Barriers to AI at Scale. Everyone today says that they are doing AI, but very few organizations have actually scaled it across businesses. From where you sit, what is the biggest barrier when companies try to move from pilots to AI at scale? Is it talent, data, infrastructure, or is it the leadership mindset? I'd like to begin with you, Mr. Krishnan.
So first of all, let me just say it is great to be, back. I've recently moved back to the NCR, and it's great to be back on this circuit, so to speak. And thank you so much for having me here. I think the problem has ceased to be a technology problem, and it's certainly what I would call an execution and an operating model challenge. Because as you bring AI into the business's operating model, is probably the first time that the rubber meets the road. And from an operating sense, you need outcomes that are consistent with the execution model of the business. Right? Until now, let's say if you've been doing pilots or you've been doing, you are still peripheral to the operating mechanism of the business. And it's only when your technology starts embedding itself into these processes that you meet real resistance. The other thing obviously is, scaling involves actual risk exposure. Until then, what are the consequences, especially when you're doing informational or assistive AI, then your consequences from an operating point of view are not significant. Now suddenly you're dealing with risk exposure that is multifold. So I think, it's between these two, between embedding AI into the operating model and between the increased risk exposure that makes it difficult to scale. And overcoming that will mean having to put your technology, having to embed it into those pieces of the organization where it hurts, which is in the operating processes, in the execution model of the company. And I think that is really the crossroads that everybody who starts with AI gets to eventually, and that would explain, at least in my view, the biggest barrier to scale.
Perfect. And what are your views on the same, Mr. Gupta?
Thanks for having me. I would say it's combination of all, but the biggest driver that is changing how the AI adoption happens is the leadership mindset. Let me explain what do I mean here. Lot of organizations today are spending a lot of money and are very excited about doing the pilots. They are excited about getting the immediate outputs. But the fundamental shift happens when you really want to adopt. And the journey from a pilot to adoption is very tiresome because you are actually integrating those into your ecosystem. And integration is what it takes a toll, and that's where the leadership mindset is very, very critical. Because during that journey, you go through the process of cost optimization. You go through the process of infra. Now, Mr. Simli was talking about use AI as infra. Absolutely, because when you're doing a pilot, it's very easy. You can quickly do POC, we got 50% improvement. But when you start doing the integration, you realize that you have to do 10 more things. You have to fix your data. You have to understand whether you have the right talent. Right? Now that's why if you're not in a right mindset of the long-term game here, you always tend to buckle down. Now that's why leadership mindset is very, very critical. The other piece, which as I said are important, is data. Now data is equally important. We are used to, as an organization, or most of the enterprise organizations are used to seeing data as a hindsight. We see the dashboards. But it is changing to a foresight. Now that mindset shift from a hindsight to a foresight is very critical one. So go in detail, but yeah, so data is another very big piece. And so is talent, because you really need to grow the talent. The pace at which AI is changing, you can't get ready-made engineers or data scientists who are changing the same pace, how the models are changing across. But what you need is a nourishing the talent, which has been the case all the time, but now even more so, because you need to let them know that it is a journey, constantly invested. Find the serious people and invest in them. So that's how my view is. So,
But Mr. Gupta, in many AI projects, like you said, the biggest challenge turns out to be data and not algorithms. How would you say that the organizations today are prepared in terms of, data quality, access, and the integration of it?
I spend a lot of time on this. Uh, you know, a great algorithm can't fix the bad data. But a bad data can make a great algorithm or a model a toy. Right? So that's why having the right data set, having the right data patterns, data sovereignty is very, very important. I tell you how. Now, I started with the fact that a lot of the organization are looking at the data in hindsight, which means I have my data flowing for X division, Y division, and Z division, but they are fragmented. Now what we try to do is we try to combine them at certain time and try to make value out of it. Now what AI does, which was not the case earlier when we were looking at dashboards, is it amplifies the noise in the data. So it brings out all the bad aspect of data because it looks for freshness. It looks for representativeness. While when you are looking at the data in fragmentation, it is not complete. It doesn't give you insights. It doesn't give you freshness. Now that's why investing in data is very, very critical for the organization. Now we have to move away from thinking data as a lake, which has been always the concept, data lakes. That's what people used to call it, right? To a data as a product. Now why we need to think data as a product? Because when we say product, a product comes with aspects around governance, it comes with aspects around security, who can access the product, who can get into the product. Same way we need to look at the data as a product, not data as a fragmented set of, kind of streams of information.
True. And Mr. Krishnan, do you see similar challenges from your side as well?
Yeah, I think, the beauty of that point is really this, that you're going from what one would call an insights or data for the purpose of insights to data for the purpose of operational execution. And there's a huge difference. As he wonderfully pointed out, when you're looking at data for insights, you are actually taking out the outliers. You are smoothing the curves. You are, really trying to figure out what is the strategic picture of that. But when you're talking about an operating model that is making millions of small little inferences to run your business, then you react to that data in real time. You don't have this advantage of hindsight. You don't have this advantage of mechanisms that set the data in context like seasonality or whatever. It's just happening as you speak. And that is a very different challenge. So when we say data, we tend to talk about data as being that static thing. And I love your point about the idea that it's not a lake any longer. Because it's, in drops, it's kind of like it's raining, in various places operationally in your business. And that requires a very different way of thinking about data, about handling it, about storing it, about processing it. And there is the challenge for most enterprises. How do you pivot from this retrospective view to an operational data as it comes as an input? You talked about it as a product, it's more like now an input to my business, just like any other raw material that we're talking about.
Perfect. But when AI moves from pilot to production, like we just discussed, infrastructure becomes critical as well, right? So how are companies deciding between cloud, hybrid, or on-premise today?
Yeah, it's interesting because at a point in time we used to say cloud first, right? But I think you're having to revisit that for a number of reasons. One, of course, is where is the data and where is the compute? Because now you have significant compute investments, and now So what I'd like to submit is that this decision of cloud first has changed, to a very, very nuanced kind of strategy, almost a workload level strategy where you say, what is the criticality of this workload? What is the cost of this workload? What is the control you need over it, the compliances around it? So I just suddenly realized while speaking that we're talking all C's, so you can call it the 3 C's or the 4 C's or whatever you want to do. But I think, cost, big deal. We've all heard those nightmare stories of cloud bill suddenly, shooting up because somebody forgot to switch off something. Then control, I think you want to know where your compute is and where your data is, which is again feeding into cost. And, compliance, which is increasingly a big deal when it comes to operational data, when it comes to personal data and all of that. So I think it's becoming almost a workload level ROI that you have to calculate to say what is the best place to put this thing. And I don't think the classical options fit very neatly. So I look at it as over time a very hybridized, very different way of looking at it with a very different set of considerations.
But you just talked about cost. Do you think that cost becomes a limiting factor when scaling?
I mean, I'd love to say no to that question, but no, absolutely it does. I think the idea that it eventually becomes, especially when you come into operations, and this is really the beauty of it, is when you come into scale, you cannot neglect the cost of that. At a pilot, it's fine. I spent a bit of money to understand or build capability. The minute it becomes a part of my, cost structure, certainly, like everything else, how companies work around cost. Like everything else, it becomes something to be optimized. The idea that I'd suddenly get a blank check for one part of my budget, while very attractive, is highly unlikely.
Now, if I have to just add, it's so funny, you talked about the cost. Nothing is at disposal which is infinite, right? And cost is definitely one of those. And you asked the question around pilot to, scale. Now the cost becomes even more important, because if you don't take care of it at the right stage, before you realize you're signing millions of dollars of check to cloud, right? Because you're running a pilot, it's like on 2 server, on 2 system, but when you're running at a scale, you're running at a millions of QPS, right? And on a system which, like, we have a catalog which is 30 million SKUs. If you have to run, and even a cent difference is lead to 300K.
But in global tech environments like Wayfair itself, scale can grow very fast, right? But what changes in architecture, like, do you see, like, when AI becomes a part of everyday operations?
Oh, a lot. Everything changes, right? We just talked about the cost. But if you see today, let me take an example. We talked about the platform engineering, just one piece of the game. But with scale, you really need to scale up your ML ops. The reason for that is you have hundreds of models at your disposal, as compared to earlier where you take a lot of time to build a model. Now you have hundreds of models that you want to deploy, test. If you don't have an automated way to deploy your models, test it, get your data, you are far behind in the game. So you need to build automated system for deployments, right? So we have at Wayfair done a lot of investment in the infrastructure part of it, where we are having our deployments on a regular basis for the models. Hundreds of data science engineers that we have, they are constantly churning the models and the testing and the production. We just collaborated with OpenAI on Dedupe for our catalog systems, which again, on the cost, we reduced the cost from like 15 cent its piece to a 0.01 cent. Now that is like 900x, so that's the kind of kind of push you need to have. Same is from your talent perspective. You have to really grow the talent, right? You really need to spend time. And I was talking about earlier the leadership mindset. That is another, why I call it infrastructure, because this is the backbone of the organization. If you don't have the right mindset, because you will see a lot of hiccups in terms of cost, in terms of people not scaling, business process is not scaling, but you have to constantly push, in the forward direction to ensure that we are making the significant change. And in the last 1.5 year, we have come a long way. So we can say that we are more towards a agentic ROI driven organization than a pilot state.
Perfect. You just brought us to a very important topic right now, leadership mindset and organization and culture. So my next question is the real challenge in scaling AI organizational or technical? Like a company struggling more with culture or with system? This question is to both of you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I think clearly it is all about organizational mindset now. If you look at technology, I would say the options are very much there, and it is well understood. The elements that are not in place are getting in place quicker than we'd like to consider. So it's largely organizational, because you see, right from the CXO level, where you have an operating model of the business in your mind and you understand the levers that are afforded to you to change, that changes. And how does that percolate down from a leadership level to everybody in their independent roles as to how this is going to matter? And just referring to my other answer where I said you have to embed it into the operating processes and the execution model of the company, that is where the pain comes. Because until now the pain is limited or the exposure is limited. I mean, obviously the point about jobs and all of that is well taken, but if you look operating from the execution point of a company, you put this here and now you have started creating resistance. Now you have people coming back and telling you why this thing is not working for them, or why they're actually engaging with it now. And that is really where organizational mindset, and I think you made a lovely point, which is you have to have the leadership mindset to persist through this phase. Otherwise, it is it's the easiest thing in the world when things are going well for you to take that call. But when you are against this resistance, when you're against this very reasonable resistance, may I add, how do you as leaders persist with the plan? How do you stick with the plan, and how do you take it past that resistance to where it actually starts delivering results? So to me, it's purely organizational at this point.
Can't agree more. It's a purely organization mindset, having a dedicated focus and perseverance to kind of make things happen. As I was saying, for the last 1.5 year, that's our focus in the organization. From top to bottom, this is all we talk about. How we gonna get into agentic ROI? How do we get into outcome driven, not input driven? So those are the continuous shift that is happening in our organization, which is changing the mindset to the ground.
One point that you mentioned is also something that we, keep on hearing again and again, that organizations are taking up a lot of pilot projects. They're running a lot of pilots, but there are not enough real deployment. So what, in your opinion, is what are these companies making the biggest mistake when it comes to, deployment?
I think I'll go back to my two of the previous points. Pilot are very, very exciting, because you get the output very quickly, but those are in isolation. I ran a model, I saw that my team productivity went 30% up. Great, let's scale it. But then you hit the roadblocks like, are you ready with your data? The moment you try to scale your pilot, you realize that you are in a fragmented data set. Your execution ready from a mindset perspective, but from an organization perspective, you are not ready. Then you start getting into this trouble of, oh, my model is not working at scale. Why? Because my data is crap. The second thing is, when you move from pilot to scale, your organization boundaries start coming in. Your business folks, they really don't get it at times, right? How do you change that mindset? Now that is not because there are people involved, it is not a technical problem. So you have to slowly get into everybody's ROI, what is in it for them, right? Make sure they understand it. So you have to cross the organization boundaries. Then you have to scale from a infra, from a cloud perspective. Then fourth, you have to think about the cost. Cost of a pilot, even if it is at $10,000, nobody cares. Executive will write the check. But you say, okay, I want to scale it, I need 10 million. Okay, hold on. Where did it come from? Right? So all of these things you really need to kind of handle one by one or come with a mindset, and that comes from my journal, which I have been harping on, this organization mindset, leadership mindset. You have to look at all those angles. Any of those not being handled appropriately leads to chaos, not scaling your pilots to productions.
Right, and I'll add that, when you talk about pilot, what is the purpose of a stream of pilots is to build capability, right, and to show intent. So what you're doing when you aggressively pilot is, it's like somebody going to the gym, right? I mean, you're adding muscles. But at some point in time, it becomes incumbent on you to take that load, right? And the switch from a capability mindset to, if you will, a business as usual or an operations mindset, that is hard to do because, to a lot of people, capability itself is a very big step. Which I did a pilot, I proved it, it works. There's a moment where you believe that, you've done something. But then you realize that capability is just really the first step of, a much bigger journey. As he said, that 10 million moment is when you realize that capability to ho gaya. But what now? What am I going to do with that, what I've acquired? How do I operationalize it? And then, as he pointed out, then reality starts setting in. So that's why you see that. In fact, I've seen a lot of organizations that pile capability on top of capability. Because it's actually possible with the evolution of the tech environment, it's possible to almost have an endless series of capability building just to be in touch with the latest and greatest. And it's also the path of least resistance as opposed to, the unglamorous part of doing the hard yards in the execution area, which is what would explain why you continue to have pilot after pilot without actually being able to scale.
Absolutely.
But would you say that is it more of, are we moving too fast towards these, or is it because we are moving towards it without a clear use case?
It's always got to be the use case one, because eventually business is about dollars and cents, and it is about what use cases are you doing, and when you strip out all the other aspects of it, these are business decisions that people are making. Now the problem is really when you come in without an expectation of a particular outcome, then it's almost an infinite use case, but the minute you start putting profit and loss to it, the minute you start putting the rules of the game which comes to building a new factory or buying a new piece of equipment to this, suddenly, you realize that, hey, my metrics are not right, my use case, my cost per transaction, as he pointed out, if I don't have those numbers, it just will not work. No matter how well it works technically, it will not fly for a minute from a business point of view. So to my mind, it's all about how do you define these use cases. Because I've noticed that thanks to relentless exposure, CXOs understand the concept. But to take that to an operating ROI model or a profitability model is still a very big step in people's minds. And to write a use case today that makes sense under all scenarios is really tough in this world that we operate.
Yeah, I would agree. I think at times we seem to be moving too fast, but actually I would say if we look at the overall ROI perspective, we are not moving as fast. Because of the same thing, people are not moving from pilot to production. They are in constant churn of pilots. So there's a sense of we are moving too fast. But the journey of pilot to integration takes time. And that is the long-term investment. So you have to keep doing the short-term flicks, but keeping the long-term in mind. Only then the journey will be successful.
But what does success in AI then actually look in an organization today?
When you move from just a quick win to a outcome driven, approach. And I can elaborate that. Now we have been talking about, okay, I did the pilot successful, let me get into the execution. But the challenges from there onwards, until you have a mindset to shift towards right infrastructure, right data model, which I talked about data as a product, right leadership mindset, right? All those until we get to, we won't be able to convert to the success. And that could be different for different companies in terms of where they see the exact ROI, but the journey remains same.
I have a view that says that success is really when you have the final structural impact of AI. See, we see, we talk a lot about the secondary impacts of AI or the primary impacts of AI. The elephant in the room is really how does it change the way we do business, right? And when you logically extrapolate that to the last point of your business, what does your business look like when every one of your processes is AI enabled? What does it mean for the kind of people you hire? What does it mean for the kind of customers you work with? What does it mean for the economics of your industry? For instance, if I'm going to take cost structures down by 30%, what does it mean for my market? What does it mean for what is happening to my customers in terms of their ability to extract that saving? And I think, we overestimate the speed. We all look at this and say, Ki, it's easy, ho jayega, we just need to roll it out. But we underestimate the structural long-term impact that these things will have to our organization. Once you start taking out all these supports, it's going to look very different. Every process, every structure, perhaps even the way we manage businesses and functions is going to change tremendously because structurally it's a different animal from what it was till last year. And I don't think we're giving that enough thought, probably because to your point and to the point of this exercise, not enough people have gotten there for us to be able to see what does that look like. When is the Uber of AI impact going to happen is probably a great question.
And since the time's up, I have one final question. Like, are we overestimating AI in the short term or underestimating how much it will change organizations in the long term?
Actually, I would say both. We are overestimating the output that we are getting from these short stints. But at the same time, which is much more important, we are underestimating the power that it can bring if we are structurally looking at the agentic ROI. I give you a small example. In our search ecosystem, right, when people come and search, there are various aspects that you can look for. The intent of the customer, which now is becoming more common. At the same time, you can look at how your data is growing. And third, what are the other elements like the social context, right? What people are searching, what is ongoing in the world, right? How do you get all those signals and use agentic to make it work across all those at the same time, which was not viable earlier. Now, if you leverage all those to combine together to give the intent-based search, you are driving the power, right? So but that will require, of course, estimate, kind of investment, but that is the power it can bring to your systems over the long run.
And I think as is clear from the overall tone of this discussion, we're also underestimating the effort that this scaling is going to take. 100%. I think as a community and as an industry, we struggle with that.
Thank you so much. On that note, clearly AI is no longer just a technology conversation. It is about data, people, and how organizations are willing to change. Thank you, Mr. Krishnan. Thank you, Mr. Gupta, for your insights and
Thanks
your
for
time.
having us.